Hello, everybody. Today we're going to continue to talk about FDR's New Deal. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of what the New Deal actually consisted of, and this is something I like to refer to as the ABCs of the New Deal. Our objective question today is, in what ways did the New Deal help Americans? All right, so the same way that Teddy Roosevelt had the square deal with the 3 C's, FDR has the New Deal, and that has the 3 R's. So the 3 R's of the New Deal, the first one is relief. This is aid that's going to be given to help people literally survive and get through the Depression. The second R is recovery, and this is stuff that's going to help us end the Depression. So relief is getting through it, recovery is getting over it, and reform is preventing it from ever happening again. All right, so relief is getting through it, recovery is getting over it, and reform is making sure it never, ever, ever happens again. So the 3 R's, relief, reform, recovery, are basically the entire premise of the New Deal. Let's look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. So relief. Relief is going to be that immediate help, that direct aid. This is what Hoover was so against, right? This is a complete contradiction of laissez-faire. This is giving money and support to whoever needs it to help them, get through what's going on right now. Some major examples of relief are going to be the bank holiday. FDR is going to shut down every single bank in the United States so they can regroup, so Congress has some time to kind of decide what they're going to do and how they're going to handle the banks. Another example is the Federal Emergency Relief Administration. This is going to dole out funds so states at a state level can help deal out relief and aid and stuff like that. So that's relief. Let's look at one of the most important examples of relief is the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. The Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC, was a public work program that is going to employ unemployed and unmarried men. They're going to task them with manual labor jobs that mostly revolve around conservation and mostly deal with work on government lands. This was a pretty good gig. They provided you shelter, somewhere to sleep. They provided you clothing, food, and $30 a month. So this is a pretty good deal if you're eligible to do this. So it's literally getting people off, the streets, unemployed people who are looking for work, putting them to work immediately. One benefit that has been kind of debated over the CCC is whether or not FDR was kind of training a bunch of future soldiers. It just so happens that the training that the CCC had to go through was very, very similar to basic training for the military. And a lot of the things that we instilled in the CCC participants was what we're going to see later in military training and stuff like that, making the beds, wearing a uniform, it's totally possible that FDR saw what was going on in Europe and, nothing wild's happened yet, but some interesting people have come to power and, it's totally plausible that FDR thought of the CCC as kind of a secondary military that he could call upon later. Now, recovery, right? Helping the United States get over, helping us improve and get back on our feet, helping the economy improve. We have to restart demand so a supply is necessary, right? Some examples of this, the WPA and a few others we'll look at right now. One of the most famous recovery agencies is going to be the Works Progress Administration. The Works Progress Administration, or the WPA, is going to employ millions of people, mostly unskilled men, to do public works projects. This includes things like building buildings, like government buildings, building roads, building bridges, stuff like this. And the WPA is seen as kind of a win-win, because people are getting jobs. These unemployed people who've been looking for, employment for so long are getting jobs. And on the other hand, the government's paying for it, but they're getting things built that they were going to need to have built anyway. So it's kind of like a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll give you a job and you build me what I need. Very popular at this point. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. You're wondering what the heck the difference is between the CCC and the WPA, because they both employ men, it's both mostly manual labor, it's both having to do with the government. Why is one relief and one recovery? Well, that's a great question. And the answer is simply the time frame. The CCC was seen as these immediate short-term projects. So if you are literally like in the gutter, face down, you need help, come join the CCC. We'll put you to work. We'll find something for you to do. This is immediate. This is to keep you like from, dying off. The WPA, on the other hand, has a much longer scope, much farther reaching purpose. The idea is we're trying to get as many people back to work as possible, and we're trying to, keep these work projects going for as long as possible so we have employment for as long as possible. The WPA is going to actually be criticized because they took a lot longer than, private sector construction would. They would not use equipment that would help save time. Instead, they do it the longer, more manual labor way. And so some criticism comes out of that. But the difference between the CCC and the WPA, and the reason CCC is relief and WPA is recovery, is because of how long we're actually using these systems. Another example of recovery, a very important one, is the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. So remember, it's tough to be a farmer again because they have all of this stuff and no one's buying it. They've made all this food, they've farmed all this, produce, they've raised all these animals, and no one wants them. And the whole concept of supply and demand is if supply is high and demand is low, you are out of luck. So what we need to do is make sure that supply goes down, because if supply goes down, demand will go up. So the AAA literally starts to pay farmers to not plant things. There's too much corn in this country, they'll say. We'll literally pay you corn farmers money to not plant corn. And some people don't plant corn, some people do plant corn, and the people who do plant corn get paid for the corn they've planted. The ones who didn't plant corn get paid not to plant corn, and now all of a sudden the balance of supply and demand has kind of stabilized, and we can start to farm again. Now, this is great, but there are also farmers who are kind of already committed. The thing about farming is there are seasons, and if I'm halfway through my soybean season and you tell me we don't need soybeans, too bad. They're already in the ground. I have them already. Same thing with animals. You call me up and tell me, hey, turns out we don't need a bunch of pigs. Well, sorry. I've got about, 6 million piglets. What do you want me to do with them? And the AAA says, you know what to do with them. And I say, oh no. And they say, oh yes. Right? And basically overnight, 6 million piglets across the nation are going to be, killed because we simply don't need them. And it's very sad, right? We said goodbye to our little piggy, but we needed to do it to help stabilize our economy, to make sure supply and demand is in the proper alignment. All right, and then our final R, reform, right? So we have relief, we have recovery. Now let's focus on reform. Reform, we're literally going to start changing laws, changing the way we dealt with money, changing some of the things that caused the Depression in the first place, to make sure that this never happens to us again. Some examples of this we'll talk about on our next slide. The FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, is going to be the reason you and I have money in the banks now. It's because we know that the money we put in the banks now is guaranteed to be repaid to us. If I put $20 in the ATM and I take it out 3 years later, that's obviously not the exact same $20 bill. But the idea is I'm putting $20 in, I'm guaranteed to be able to take that $20 back out, right? This is something that did not exist before. It sounds so simple to us. Of course it's guaranteed. Well, back then it wasn't, which is how so many people lost their money in the stock market crash, because they had put their money in the banks and assumed they'd be able to get it out, and they were wrong. So we're going to put insurance in place to make sure that all the money in the banks actually comes back to you. Real quick, that's actually why, a lot of really old people are afraid of banks. They, keep their money in their, under their mattress or in a hole in their backyard. It's because they don't trust banks. It's because they lived through the Great Depression. All right. The SEC is going to put regulations on the stock market and how you buy and trade within the stock market to hopefully prevent another crash from happening. And the most important and maybe not important, but most famous aspect of reform is going to be the Social Security Act. So signed into law by FDR, the Social Security Act is meant to serve as a safety net for all Americans. If you work, if you've ever, gotten a paycheck, you have had money come out of your paycheck and go towards Social Security. Every single person pays into it. the benefits of Social Security. Number one is that when you reach the ripe old age of 65, you'll begin to receive monthly payment checks to you. The idea is that you've paid into it all the way up until 65, and now that you are 65, you can start taking those benefits back, and we're going to start to pay you basically to be old. And I'm obviously oversimplifying, but that's pretty much the easiest way to think about it. Another additional aspect of Social Security is that we're going to be able to offer unemployment insurance to those who cannot work. All right. So FDR was very proud of the Social Security system. He liked the idea that you were paying for it as you aged. And so because you're paying into it, there's no way we could ever take it away. And that's literally what he said. Direct quote, very famous. No blank, I'm not going to say that word, politician can ever scrap my Social Security program. Right. And so far he's been right. The significance of the Social Security program and kind of the New Deal in general is the idea that it's the federal government's job to take responsibility of people who can't help themselves. This is the opposite of laissez-faire, right? Herbert Hoover is probably horrified at this. But it's the idea that, the federal government, someone has to help you out if you can't help yourself. Now, downsides to the Social Security Act, when it was put into place, when it was signed into law, 1935, lifespan was a lot shorter. The average person was lucky to live to about 65 years old. Now, of course, as we've improved with medical science and sanitation and all that crazy stuff, our life expectancy has gone up, which means people live longer, which means we have more people collecting Social Security. This graph down here, you can see when this is signed into law, we have about 6.7 million people living in our country that are 65 or older. Compare that to now, almost 35 million people who are theoretically all using Social Security. So definitely a change, definitely a drawback. And it's also important to understand that the Social Security Act is meant to supplement your income. It's not meant to completely replace it. But those are issues we'll see later on. So that was the New Deal. Those are the 3 R's: relief, reform, recovery, right? Getting through the depression, getting over the depression, and making sure the depression never happens again. All right. Make sure to answer your objective questions. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.